3 years ago, Europe's governments spent billions, nay hundreds of billions, bailing out their banks. And that prevented a financial crisis turning into an outright depression. The problem 3 years later, as we face another financial crisis, is that the governments simply don't have the money. So when the IMF and now the European Commission suggests another round of mass recapitalisations, who's going to pay for that?
Where's the capital going to come from? Does it come from the private sector or does it come from the public sector? The Germans have said, look, we'll stand behind our banks. The French have said, well, actually, we're not quite sure we can stand behind our banks, but if someone else could help us out, that'd be great, because if the French do it on their own, they're going to lose their AAA rating. If they lose their AAA rating, then, you know, the EFSF can't gear itself up from 400 billion to 2 trillion.
And if you don't have a massive bailout fund, affectionately known as the EFSF, you won't have the big bazookas to take on the markets, which have taken on huge bets that the Eurozone can't or won't put its money where its mouth is. In many ways, the banks are the cause and the cure in this now, the second financial crisis. In the boom times, governments borrowed from banks, gave the money to taxpayers, and they hoped would get re-elected. Now, though, the banks want their money back and the governments don't have the money. So perhaps if the banks consider writing off vast swathes of that debt, that would get the governments off the hook. The only problem is that will collapse many of the banks. Is it fair that many countries are talking about Greece having a write-off or haircut of around 60% of its debts when Portugal has to repay 100% of its debts?
I will give you a diplomatic answer. We are focused on our programme. Fulfill our commitments, honor our word, and if we do it, we'll do our job. I think this will be recognized by markets and international community.
And what's the undiplomatic answer? What's the undiplomatic answer?
Look, you have to wait.
So over the coming weeks, are Eurozone politicians prepared to lengthen dole queues, strangle growth and risk their own jobs to preserve a currency which was constructed in another era by a very different group of leaders?
Well, we're joined now by Margot James, a Conservative MP, by John Micklethwaite, the editor of The Economist, and we're joined from Brussels by Guy Verhofstadt, an MEP who used to run Belgium. Let's talk about unemployment, first of all. Mr Verhofstadt, it's going to get worse right across Europe, isn't it?
Yes, we have now also, in my opinion, the economic fallout of this debt crisis in Europe. But it's not only affecting the Eurozone, it's also affecting all the members of the European Union. And if you look, for example, to the figures, then the fiscal deficit in Britain is higher than the average in the Eurozone. If you look to economic growth in Britain is lower than the average in the Eurozone. The same for the debt. Debt ratio is higher in Britain than in the Eurozone. Right. So I don't think you can see that as a consequence of the euro. On the contrary, the problem with the euro is that we need as fast as possible to build up an economic and a fiscal union besides the monetary union.
Okay, I think we understand where you're coming from quite clearly for the moment, but we'll come to the euro in a second. Just on this question of unemployment, first off, John Micklethwaite, it is going to get worse, isn't it? A great deal worse.
Yes, it is, both in Britain and particularly in the European Union, because whatever Guy says, at the moment, other economies around the world, China, America, they're not actually worried about Britain, they're worried about the Eurozone. And indeed, the whole world economy is worried about the Eurozone. And unless it actually begins to grow and begins to actually deal with this debt crisis, unemployment will continue to get worse.
Now, how much is actually in the hands of any individual government, the British government, for example, leaving aside the Eurozone for a moment?
Well, the British government is taking measures and has taken measures to reduce the effect of regulation on business, stimulate the private sector.
They're not having much effect, are they?
Well, we saw in the report earlier that the number of private sector jobs has been created over the last quarter, but unfortunately, it's not offsetting the number of jobs that have been lost in the public sector.
You told us the growth would. You told us that losses in the public sector would be compensated for by growth in the private sector, and that has not been the case.
Well, there have been 500,000 jobs created in the private sector in the last 12 months. I don't think we could have forecast quite this scale of economic chaos that has engulfed not just the Eurozone, but also the United States. Has got flat or zero growth, unemployment worse than ours. So all of our export markets are under considerable pressure. So I think, you know, there clearly is a problem, but I think the government have got some measures to influence it in a positive way,
now,
if not solve the outright
John Micklethwaite,
problem.
if the Eurozone is going to impact badly upon us, there is some argument, is there not, for us making a substantial, generous contribution to the European Stability Fund?
Well, that's the argument, pay to play. That's what I suspect Guy will come in very hard on that, is the idea that the British, in order to have a role in devising this new Europe, they will have to put up some money. That one argument for that is that, I think even some British people might see this, is that that would give us a voice, and it would certainly provide a much more liberal direction to the way in which Brussels is going. But against that, I don't think Margot would like to go and see the electors of Stourbridge and tell them that we're going to put up money towards an organisation that most of us didn't want to join.
Guy Verhofstadt, what do you think of the suggestion that the British should make some contribution, pay to play?
I should say that's a very good idea, but I don't think it's very realistic. Very realistic. But nevertheless, the reality is that Britain has a huge interest in a sound Eurozone. And it should think about helping to rescue the Eurozone. But the way to rescue the Eurozone is a question of creating, as I said already, of an economic and fiscal union, because it's nonsense to have a single currency on the one side and then 17 different governments, 17 different economic strategies, and at the same time 17 different bond markets. So what we need to do now is to make an enormous jump forward in European integration to rescue this
spoken like a loyal Belgian, eh? What about John Micklethwaite?
Well, I respectfully disagree. Yes, there will have to be more Europe than there is at the moment. I think everyone pretty much accepts that for the Eurozone. Yeah. There will have to be more. Yes, you will need some kind of budgetary supervision authority, somebody who just check whether the numbers are correct. And yes, you're probably going to need some Eurozone bank regulation to make sure that they cover the whole Eurozone rather than international stuff. But once you start jumping ahead towards full fiscal union, I think you run into all sorts of problems, not just intellectual ones, which we might say, but just practical ones. You cannot even persuade Slovakia to go along even briefly on what's a huge deal. You look at the numbers in Germany.
How are they going to think about it in Stourbridge?
Well, I think the important thing is that Britain won't be a part of this closer fiscal union. We're fortunate in that we are not in the euro, so we're not going to be a part of that, nor will we be a part of the bailout, because we'd have to borrow, wouldn't we, in order to fund the weaknesses elsewhere. But I think the flaw in the logic, I understand the economic theory of closer fiscal union to support the single currency, but the flaw is the democratic deficit in the argument, because, as John was saying, Slovakia won't agree. So any country which has to ratify a treaty change via the electorate will find it very difficult to get approval.
Mr. Verhofstadt, presumably you believe in the old European practice of simply telling the Slovakians to go back and vote again, do you?
Sorry, I didn't understand your question.
I suppose you think the Slovakians should just go back and have another vote, do you, until they come to a conclusion you like?
No, I think that we need to change the rule in this European Rescue Fund. It's completely nonsense to continue with the Rescue Fund that is based on a unanimity rule, as it is the case today, because that makes that one political party in one of the 17 euro members can block a rescue, an operation of the rescue fund. So I think that we need more firepower in this rescue fund if we want to rescue the euro. First of all, by abolishing the unanimity rule in the rescue fund, and secondly, also, and that is very important, by increasing the money that you put in this rescue fund. Because
how much?
Let's be very honest. Today, well, I think we have to double, at least maybe to triple the money that is today in the rescue fund if we want really to stabilize the euro.
All right.
And let me be say one thing as a conclusion. That is that it is the financial markets today and the stock markets who are asking for an economic and fiscal union besides the monetary union.
Okay.
They say that if you want a single currency, you need also one economic policy.
Right. Just very quickly from you two here, Barroso today is talking about, what, 440 billion. The talk now is of 1.2 trillion being what's really needed. What do you think it is?
My guess is it's higher. It's towards 2 trillion.
You
Or
wanna bid it
certainly
up a
4
bit
times
more?
what they've suddenly
Well,
got.
I think that sounds like it would tilt the balance against some of the stronger markets losing their AAA rating. Who's going to find this 2 trillion? We don't want to throw the relatively healthy economies babies out with the bathwater, do we?
The lesson so far is you always pitch it quite low, and then you come in. Well, if you come in with an answer which is bigger than anyone expects, then you restore
It
confidence.
certainly needs to be close to 1 trillion.
All right. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Now.